All right, so we're ready to get started. So thanks everybody for coming this Friday afternoon. Thanks, Katie, for building the crowd with the Jimmy John sandwich. Looks like that definitely had a bump with RSVPs based on what we've been talking. Anyway, yeah. So this talk is basically about communication for consultants. The asterisk is because it's mostly for software consultants. It's from my point of view for the most part. But I hope that everybody here can take something from it. If you are not a software consultant yourself, you probably work with them, so there's something in there for everybody to learn. Or it's mostly, I think there's a lot of things where we want to also get some get a discussion going, maybe to see about what everybody else thinks. So that's what we'll do. So why did I choose this, right? So as software engineers, as software consultants, it's very easy for us to see, okay, if I learn this, I can do this project. I know I can get ahead in my career, but it's not immediately obvious what is the point of working on your communication skills, on your interpersonal skills. So that's something that I think about a lot, and I think as we talk about, whenever we're hiring people, the first thing that we say is they need to be smart, but the second thing they need to say is probably 1 and 1A, like they need to be excellent communicators, right? So that's something that we always look for in people to join Solution Street. So that's something that we said. So I guess the idea is that you can either look at other people as a nuisance, like as people that you want to deal with, or you can look at them as people, as members of a team, people that you can learn from, people that you can work with, well to for the cause of the project, for your career, and so on. So let me just get this out of the way. What is that? Anyway. Yeah, I just have some quotes kind of just to guide the discussion. I always feel like programming is a social activity, right? The idea is for all programmers, their primary job is to talk to other programmers, right? Yeah. So every programmer is an author, right? So that's something that I also believe in. I also believe that like writing a program is not usually much more different from writing something, like writing a note or an essay or a document. The idea is that we write something, somebody else should be able to read it in a way that is easy, right? We're not in the business of writing a mystery novel or something that is a thriller with a twist ending. It should be easy reading. You just read the program and you know what's going on, right? It's as simple as that. So this is something that comes up when we write when we write a software program. The idea is that a program should be self-documenting, right? So there is a school of thought that says that if you have any comments in your code, that's probably a code smell. I don't know. Have you heard that before? Has anybody heard that?
Any comments?
Or like too many comments or some comments, yeah.
I think the extreme is any.
Yeah.
And then the kind of extreme is
no comments.
Too many.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So the idea is that, so what does that mean, right? When you say good code is self-documenting, the idea is that you use good variable names, you use good method names. So when you read something, it's immediately obvious what is going on, right? And can you break it up into small pieces, into small chunks, and so on. But does that mean that you should not write any comments? Well, you probably shouldn't write comments like this, right? Because that's pointless, right? You know what's going on. You probably don't want to write comments like this either, right? This is like every line has a comment. You know what's going on. It's just adding craft to your code. But something like this, maybe, right? I mean, there's a header comment. It's just telling you what's going on in your code a little bit. That's probably fine, right? But for the most part, I think since we're in the software consulting business, we're solving problems for our clients. There are in some cases what you want to do is basically the comment should talk about the why a particular, why you've written the code in a certain way, why you've chosen a certain method, this is a great example that I found, which basically says why we chose a particular algorithm to solve the problem when the most obvious thing would be just to do a binary search, right? So the next person who comes in will be like, hey, why didn't we just do binary search? And instead of that, we have this very complicated algorithm that is hard to follow. And then this explains why. It's because the data set that we were dealing with was more, it was better to use the other complicated algorithm for performance purposes or whatever, right? So that's basically the point of comments. So I mean, the point of this first section was basically like comments can be used to communicate, right? The idea is that you're communicating with your peers, with your team members, with other people, or also with yourself, like 2 months later, because you might not remember why you did something. So the idea is the most useful comments will usually answer why. If you're writing too many comments about how something is working, that's probably a code smell. Like you don't want to, like that's the part that should be easy to read and obvious and so on, right? You can have a header comment usually that explains the purpose of a function or a module, and you can have inline comments for for a few things here and there, right? So one of the things that I like to, but what we see a lot is like, again, in the consulting business, like you write something that is really elegant, and then the client will be like, hey, what about, can we do this in this special case? And then you have to write one if statement, and then you have to write another switch. So in those cases, you probably want to explain why you're adding, special cases to your really elegant program or something like that, right? So that's the reason why here. When I was looking this up, I found these funny comments. I mean, these could be fun too. My favorite was stop hammer time. That was a good one. Yeah. Do not touch. I'm just going to leave this here while I get some more. These are good comments. That's it. But maybe in your personal projects, not in your client. No. Yeah. I wrote all of these. Anyway, so what are the opportunities to do this, right? So, I mean, whenever you have a code review, if you have a pull request, you want to, you could point out that, okay, adding a comment here might be useful. Like I've done that, and actually it has worked out. If, the person who has written the code is okay with, or if, if your team is okay with it, you could add comments to somebody else's code. I don't know how that works. I mean, that's probably team dependent. Like, some people don't like, other people working on their code or whatever. So anyway, and then of course you could just, write comments when you're actually first writing the code in the first place, and that could be part of your process. All right. So that was the first section. So next, I just wanted to, this is probably the bulk of the presentation where we're talking about feedback. So let me just get to my notes. So as software consultants, as we're working with the team, right, we are always giving each other feedback, right? You're talking to your team members about a design of a solution. You're talking to your client or to the business users about how you want to approach a problem. And of course, the biggest thing is code reviews. I mean, that's usually built into the process for many teams, where we have to then, put out you basically do something and then somebody else gets to critique it, right? Gets to review it, give you comments and so on. So that is basically something that in most teams, I feel like, depending how the team is, this process is the one that can be a source of conflict, or it could be a play for a good working team. If you have, the mode of communication is mindful and it's good, like, you might end up having a team that works well with each other, and people like, like the morale of the team doesn't suffer whenever somebody has to do a code review, right? So this is it, right? So everybody, like all of us, whenever again, now I'm talking, this isn't kind of through the prism of code reviews, but it could probably apply to anything, right? It could apply to design documents. It could apply to any situation where you're basically giving or receiving feedback, right? So if you're just talking about software, for example, right? I mean, there are everybody, whenever you put something out for a review, right? There are two feelings that are coming. Everybody has a little bit of an imposter syndrome. I mean, you are a little insecure that, okay, this code is now going to get reviewed by somebody else and they're going to tell you whether it's okay or not. And at the same time, you also have pride in your work, right? Okay, you've done a great job. It works as expected. You've written all the tests and, it satisfies the function that, so you feel like whoever reviews it should just rubber stamp it. And then, it should just move into test and production and so on, right? So that's something that we always have to be wary of when we are in this process of something that we all have to be completely in tune with. Is you are not your code, right? It's just something that you do, and if somebody is giving you feedback, it's not something that they are criticizing you. They just have a different opinion about how something is working or something has been done, right? Mm-hmm. So I found this graph. I think this was really great. So this is basically kind of, again, through the 4 code reviews, it's kind of identifying the different areas where the x-axis is the reward axis, where it's high reward and low reward. The y-axis is conflict. So as you can see in the top, in the left quadrant, top left quadrant, it's basically stuff that can lead to a lot of conflict, but with very little reward, right? These are like small things like tabs versus spaces, indentations, styles, and so on. So these things should probably be automated away, right? So you don't want code reviews to focus on this. You don't want to be able to if you had to give comments about these things on a pull request, you'd probably be commenting on every 3rd or 4th line if that was a problem, right? So that's something that should probably be handled outside of code reviews. On the bottom right, for example, you're reviewing a code and now you found a bug, right? It doesn't work like it's supposed to, or you found an edge case that it doesn't handle and you're able to reproduce it. So nobody's going to feel bad about you pointing that out, right? If they do, then that's a whole different thing. But because it's an objectively something is wrong and it's not working like it's supposed to. So that should not, probably lead to conflict. And of course, making sure that things are working correctly, there's a high reward to that. The top right is probably the source of a lot of conflict, where these are subjective things, right? So things are doing what they're supposed to, but the reader is not happy about the style of how it was done, or maybe there's, it's over-engineered to in a way that is a lot of things are abstracted out where they don't really need to be, and it could be much simpler, right? So the idea is that, this again depends on the team. If the team agrees, and if you have that much equity, you build the trust within your team, you could point these things out in a way that, that can foster collaboration. And, the idea is that everybody has to understand that we are not, this is not about, personal preferences. It's about, both the receiver and the sender of the feedback is going to probably move on at some point. The application is going to stay, the code is going to live on, and the idea is that should be the focus of any review or any collaboration. So this is again this is something that kind of talks to what the different types of conflicts that can happen, the different ways of dealing with the conflict, right? So if you have somebody that is avoiding or yielding, is that somebody refuses to put their code up for review, or somebody who does not solicit feedback often enough, right? Yielding could be somebody who, if I'm the reviewer, I would not be happy with the code. I see some problems, but I don't want to deal with it, so I just say, it's okay, fine. It looks good to me. Let's move on. Let's move on to the next thing. Competing is basically what I was talking about, where there can be many differences of opinion, but then people are not. This can kind of lead to a stalemate situation where you basically are talking to each other, but you're not being able to arrive at at a common ground, right? So you give some feedback and the feedback is rejected, or you don't, or the receiver doesn't receive it in the spirit that it was meant, or they take things personally, and those are the things that should be avoided. And the idea is that everything, the point is that anything that you have, whenever you are communicating, tend towards fostering collaboration, right? So when you are when everything is when you're communicating something and you're listening to feedback, always keep in mind that the fact is that, okay, we're collaborating on a project. The idea that everybody wants this thing to be better and to be right. So we don't want that to be like, that should be the focus of any interaction or any meeting.
So, Prashant?
Yeah.
So what should I get out of this graphic? Is my question.
Oh no, this is just pointing out.
Or could it just be a list? Like I'm trying to understand if there's something.
Yeah, this is
meant to be communicated by the graphic.
No, this is. I picked it up when I was looking at stuff, and it's basically a list. It's just a different modes of
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, just 5 things. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was like, well, the outside things are sort of negative. You're trying to get to the middle.
No, it's not. Yeah, I guess. It says.
I see it as a 3D
Yeah.
graphic where compromising is like on top of everything.
Yeah.
Like that's how it comes across to me.
That's true. There's a reason why the compromising is in the middle. Like, compromising is in the end, like, if it's not, for example, if you're not able to sort things out, you have to, somebody has to compromise, right? So you have to do that. So the idea is that whenever we're practicing communication, to always be mindful, right? And what does that mean, right? The idea is to always listen and speak with compassion, kindness, and you speak with you speak and listen with an awareness of yourself and with others, right? Always put yourself. You put yourself in the other person's shoes. It's not. So the idea is that when you're communicating something to somebody, you should also have a sense of, okay, what would I feel like if something like this was told to me, right? Like, so am I saying it in the right tone? Am I saying it in a way that is not personal? And I'm focusing on the work and not like, talking to somebody in a way that, I wouldn't like to be talked to. And you listen to what's being said. And the last thing was letting go of what you think the outcome should be. So I have a special slide for this, is because this is probably something personally that I have struggled with the most in terms of letting go of what you think the outcome could be. Because, like, obviously, whenever we have a situation where we are collaborating on a solution and you have to come up with a design or set the stage or at any stage, right? There are often situations where you have a team and then there are people on the team that have a different idea about what the approach should be, right? So the idea is that, and then, of course, there are different ways to deal with this, right? The idea is that when you're working with a team and as consultants, usually you may or may not have control on the final say. You may not have the final say, right? So the idea is that you present your solution, you give your best shot, you make sure you're heard, and then in the end, and then once you've done that, the idea is to kind of step away, and then if the decision doesn't align with exactly with what you suggested, that's fine, right? Because maybe the decision maker had different priorities. There might be something else that that basically led to whatever decision was taken, or or whatever the reason may be. And on the flip side is that if you are the person who is in charge of the decision, and then you may have team members who may not be happy with it. So the idea is for you to be a little bit aware of that. Make sure they understand that they were heard. Explain to them why you took the decision that did not exactly align with what they wanted to do, right? So I guess this goes both ways, right? Do you have anybody else has any ideas about this or anything to talk about?
I think that goes along with listening. I think sometimes people, they think the way it should be coded or the way something should be architected, this is the way it should be. And so they'll describe what they think it should be. And because they're trying to get to that outcome, they won't listen to other people. I guess to listen, they won't hear what other people think about how they think it should be architected or coded. So they're kind of going hand in hand.
Right.
I think it should be important too that you do come to a final decision, document it.
Right.
So it doesn't keep coming back up again.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Do this one, but next time I'm going to get that.
Right.
The outcome that I want. But make a decision, actually know it.
Yeah. Right. I think as Greg just said, I'm just going to repeat it for the sake of the stream. It was just like once the decision has been made, it's idea for the team to come together, right? So I think in my notes I had like bonus points for later not saying I told you so, like if something didn't work out the way you did it. So before giving any feedback, I'm sorry.
Hey, yeah, I also got a comment on the last slide.
Yeah.
I think as developers, we should not always look at the outcome as it being final. You know what I mean? What I mean is like there's a whole mentality, and maybe in the olden times, like say 20 years ago, the word refactor wasn't very prevalent. But recently it has been that, you know, hey, look, whatever we write is a learning process, right? There's always room for improvement. And when we go through peer reviews and whatnot, it should be an engagement of one learning for a person who may or may not have that skill or that pattern that they build with. And two, it also, you know, brings the team up to speed with, you know, how code is being built, the bigger picture, because when you start with baking bread, for instance, right? You start with flour, then you had to add another ingredient and add another ingredient, right? You don't know the full perspective until the end of it, right? So if a customer comes in and says, hey, listen, I need this other feature, now you're like, okay, well, I built this nice and beautiful, but now I'm going to add all these conditions that are going to make it ugly, right? And I think that part of as the developers, our responsibility should be that we should not look at things as being final or need to be perfect, but it should be close enough so that it speaks to our professional abilities and also leaves room for improvement, right?
Yep. Thank you. All right. So yeah. So carrying on. So before giving any feedback, right? The idea is to first like just check in with yourself, answer a few questions, like why did they, you know, why was this code written the way it is? Is, like, you know, as I said before, like, is the tone and wording of my feedback something that I would feel good if somebody would told me, would I receive this in a way that would be constructive? Am I sure, like, I know the right way of doing something? Am I not allowing space for something that was not, you know, maybe the writer knows something that I don't, and then that's why they've done something a certain way? And the last thing is, do I have enough time right now to give proper feedback? Like, am I hungry? I'm hungry right now. Am I not, am I in a hurry because I'm slammed with all my tickets and I don't have time to give to give proper feedback? So I may just write something that quickly, which may not be the most thoughtful way of giving feedback. So these are just a few things to be aware of when you're giving feedback. The other thing, like, one of the tips was, don't jump to conclusions, right? So don't immediately jump to conclusion. Don't tell somebody that they did something wrong. Like, just tell them, maybe tease out of things about what they were thinking. Ask them if, you know, phrase things as a question. Say, what happens if, you know, if this is a situation? What about, have you considered these options, right? Instead of just telling them that they're wrong. This is more for, like, in situations where you look at something and then you're like, what is this? It does not make any sense. This is not at all what I was expecting. So instead of basically like saying something like that, you basically ask open questions. You basically, like, you know, the idea is to kind of invert the way of communicating. You say, hey, I'm having trouble following what, you know, this document is, or what, you know, what the changes were. Can you explain this to me? You know, what other options were considered when you wrote this? Like, you know, things like that. The other thing is, like, this next few slides are sort of, I guess, could be considered pet peeves, because I think about this a lot sometimes, is that when we're working in a team and then you say, hey, you need to do this, right? The idea is that whenever I hear that, like, immediately it takes me out. It'll be like, I think it's always like we need to do something, right? So that's something that I think about it. Or you could, instead of saying you could just phrase something in a way that is more passive. So, you know, it's not direct or not something that is in the second person.
Just
yeah.
be careful with that, though.
Yeah.
There's sometimes we use way too much, and then no one takes responsibility
right.
for doing something. So there's a fine line there. Sometimes.
No, that's true. The idea is that, that has to be clear, right?
But there are times where you need to make sure that person knows they need.
Right. So I think we'll get to that actually. No, it's fine. So it's, again, so saying we is usually like, I think it does help foster collaboration. But the idea is that it's not something that, saying you instead of saying we instead of you can feel silly, because again, like, you want to make clear that, who's responsible for a task, right? So it's very clear that, okay, there's somebody's working on a ticket or somebody's working on a task and they're responsible for it. And saying we can sound silly or patronizing, but the idea is that, as we said, there's a fine line in between, like, fostering collaboration versus making somebody feel like they're alone and they don't have any help around them, right? So it's just something that we have to be kind of wary of when we talk or write something down. And this is something that I did. What I've seen is that, when somebody's giving me feedback and then they say what I would do is, and that immediately takes me out. So just do it, right? If you want to do it, instead of like. I tend to prefer always using like the collective way of phrasing things, like, which is what we need to do this, and what, could we try this, something like that, or it sounds better to me. It keeps me in a way that is like, the project and the team are at the center of what we are trying to do. Again, the other thing that we could try is like phrasing feedback as a question. So instead of saying like, we already have something that does this, can say, hey, is this functionality different enough that we need a separate function? Could we just reuse a function or not? Or just as a suggestion, like, instead of saying, could we, like, just basically phrasing things in a way that are just softer and not something that could, cause offense or conflict. And you could always, as I said before, right? You could always offer to help whenever you're giving feedback, right? If you feel like there's something that could help the project. I mentioned before, talking about adding comments. Like, I've done that before. Like, with the permission of the author, I've added in comments just to kind of clarify a few things with the code that I was reviewing. In this case, the one thing that I wanted to discuss here, which was basically something that I read while looking up material for this talk, was this thing about like a compliment sandwich method of offering feedback, where you are basically, when you're offering feedback, like, you start with a compliment and then you give your feedback, which may or may not be complimentary, and then you end with something that is also affirming and positive, which could be a way of of helping out, or just like ending in a way. And I almost included that here, but then I read a different article which basically said, don't do that, because it comes up as like patronizing and just contrived, right? So the idea is that, I'm still like, and I was thinking about the way I sometimes give feedback. Like, if sometimes, like, I think I would tend to, the first way where I would like, point out some good things, maybe, and then give some feedback, and then, I don't think I have the bottom half of the sandwich. It's just kind of open-faced sandwich, but that's something that but the idea is that, as long as you are genuine, like, as long as you are, again, keeping, the improvement of the product or the software or the document as the focus, I think that should be fine. So this is just a few things to kind of be aware or wary of. Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is something, again, like I like to do. I think it's like offering praise is free. Like, you make somebody's day. This also depends on the team, obviously. Like, what they're like. I think some teams, like, no news are like, in the no news is good news. Like, they just have a thumbs up, like, looks good to me, and then they move on. And in other cases, the teams that, I think, but taking the time to kind of appreciate like a well-written document, or something that is solving a tricky problem in a way that is very elegant, or laying out a soft, like, functions or modules in a way that is, you can see that is very clear and is extensible. It's something that is we all should probably do, and again, it just goes into like just spreading good vibes around the team. And then this is something that like. Something that I've done personally, which I feel it does work well. Like, if you're reviewing something, and then instead of writing a lot of comments, if you're not exactly sure what's going on, or if you feel like there might be a lot of comments, you could offer to like take the discussion offline. Like in what I did at least once or twice was I was reviewing this whole new module which was solving like a bunch of business problems, and I couldn't follow. It was like I could follow, but it was really hard. Like I had to really like lock in and focus, and it wasn't very easy to read. So then I just asked for like a call with the author, and we just kind of went. I asked him to explain this. So then as he was explaining, he realized that, okay, this is not as easy to follow. And then he was just taking notes himself about, like, okay, I should probably add a comment here, or I should structure this method a little differently, or I should rename this method. And, I didn't have to actually write all those things down in my code review comments. So I think that's something that, that can help just keeping the feedback. Like, so the idea is that you do that, and then you go back and then you kind of just summarize whatever you talked about on the call or whatever, like in your code review comment, and then that way you make sure you close the loop. So most of these things was about giving feedback. Receiving feedback is probably as or more, if not as important, probably more important. Like the idea is that what you should keep in mind when somebody is giving you feedback. Make sure that you have. So this is like, so if you've written something and you're receiving feedback that you don't particularly agree with, or you're not exactly sure what they were said, well, how would you feel if you were not the author of the code and you read that feedback, or if you weren't the author of a document? How would you respond, if you were somebody else, right? For example, you could say, like, what would Arthur do, right? Like, you see Arthur is usually, like, very calm and cool and collected. So how would he respond to a comment that, that you are, like, trying to get fired up about? And what if the comments were phrased differently, right? So maybe the reviewer didn't, follow the suggestions that we threw out, and they were, like, a little more direct and a little abrupt and harsh. But what if they just, what if they were phrased in a way that was a little bit constructive? Like, can you get to the actual source, of the meat of what the feedback is? Mm-hmm. So the idea is, so whenever you're getting feedback, obviously, it's whoever is giving you feedback has spent time reviewing what you've done. They reviewed your work, so the idea is to always express gratitude. Like the person who's giving you feedback know that they're appreciated, and they're and then that you want to move forward in the spirit of cooperation and collaboration. And the idea is that you always assume good intentions, right? So, and this is obviously harder. It's easier to say it than to do it. But whenever you're receiving feedback, I mean, again, the idea is to make sure that, like, okay, we're working on a team together. So it's not. So whatever feedback you're getting is not something that, it's something that they think is going to improve the work product, right? The document or the application. So, of course, I mean, there's a limits to that. If somebody's being abusive or somebody's just being unnecessarily harsh, I mean, that shouldn't stand, and that should be escalated and handled in a way that it should be. But I think the idea is to kind of err on the side of assuming good intentions, and then try to move with that in mind as much as you can. All right. So that's all I have about feedback. Does anybody else have anything to add or comment at this point? Sure.
In the good, better phrasing part, the word "just" can mean something. For example, there's like an over-engineering function, and you comment, "Why don't we just do it this way?" And then you explain.
Yeah.
The word "just" can be like, "Oh, I didn't think about that," as the author. And maybe if we remove the word "just," it helps them think that, I didn't think about the simpler solution, and it just helps with a feeling that you don't do it.
Are you saying it's a positive thing to use the word "just" or a negative?
Negative. I'm not explaining it.
Why do you think that?
Yeah.
Especially when they say, "Geez."
Yeah.
Just do it this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. I think so. You say, like, just why didn't you just do this instead, right? So it makes it's basically like belittling what you've done. Yeah.
Little bit,
right?
Well,
Yeah,
that's true too. As it kind of goes along with this, is that nowadays, our project, and I'm sure other projects, we have pull requests that are needed, and so you do your code review pull request. It's asynchronous. It's an online pull request. It's not talking to somebody. It's writing your comments.
Yeah.
And like everything, you should be extra careful about what you write and how that sounds, because you can't convey a tone of voice in writing. It's very hard to convey how you're speaking. There's no eye contact. There's none of those things. So when you write something that you think is benign, it can come across differently. So you should pay double attention to how you write things.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes along with that.
Sure.
So I had an interesting experience maybe Casey was working with a certain team, providing code review comments and making comments like you suggested. You not use just, but why? Why don't we think about refactoring this to make it more efficient, whatever? And the person receiving it is silent about it because they're looking for more direction. Like, you need to do this. You need to do that.
Okay.
They don't feel, and it might have been the situation we were in, but they don't feel empowered to make a decision to just do the refactoring. They're junior. It was a cultural thing. So that is interesting too. Is when you make those things, is it you really want them to do it now, or something to consider doing or talk about doing? There's a fine line there.
Right. I think the idea is
I don't know. Sometimes this is just me. Sometimes we beat around the bush a little bit on that stuff.
Sure.
And you just want them to do it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think, but it goes both ways, right? Because the station of somebody in life or the experience in their project can also influence things. For example, if you have somebody who's on the architecture team of a project and they go into some code to review, and they truly do just want somebody to do a little research to see if this is the best way of doing things, if their comment can sometimes be considered, like the Bible, like, oh, I'm just going to change it to whatever this person said because they must know more than me. They're more experienced than I am, and so it's like you kind of have to find the balance, right? And know who your audience is and know what the relative relationship is of the person providing the comment and the person receiving the comment. If the person providing the comment is a known sort of expert on the software, their comment is going to, by definition, have more weight than other people. And so that person themselves needs to be clear about, is this something that you need to change because it's incorrect? Or, hey, I'm not sure about this. Can you do a little bit of research in our own code to see is there a helper function that does this? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's along the same lines.
Right. All right. Yep. I mean, I think that's very important. So I think the discussion again, what we had was about like there's a fine line between there was written comments, making sure that you're really wary about how when you write something, it comes across. Try to as much as possible in the way that you meant it. I don't know whether like emojis help in that way, but maybe they can help. Smiley face is always good, right at the end.
Somebody could be very sort of sarcastic or something. I always try to say, no, I don't really mean that you're, this, like, put a smiley face.
Yeah.
It's kind of joking.
Right, and then again, and also like making sure that when we're adding comments, we have to make sure that they're written in a way that it's clear what the expected outcome is, right? We don't want, like, if you write something in a way that is too passive, they might say, oh, it's fine, it's a good suggestion, but I guess we can just move on. It's not something that needs to be actually worked on for this to move forward, right? So that's great.
Do you think we should be doing offline code reviews? Like, do you think that's a good idea? We have no other choice.
Yeah, I mean,
but if you had a choice, do you think you should? So I personally, unless it's something trivial, would prefer to, and we did this, so not on the current project with Deltek I'm on, the one that was Kona, and we had a small development team. We would most often, I would get on a call with one or more other peer developers, and I would have my code in my screen share, and I would say, here's what I'm doing here, here's what I'm doing here, and just discuss it. And that, it works better, but sometimes it's not feasible.
We did actually used to do that, at least in my team, like a long, long time ago, and it just got to the point where it was taking too much time. Like, we go through so many PRs every day, it just takes too long.
I think something is lost.
Yeah.
You just do it offline. I really did. You can't get that explanation, or you have to then have a discussion online. I'm not sure what you're doing here, what are you doing? And then
It's like spend 20 minutes in a chat and not get to the answer, whereas 3 minutes on the phone, you could get right to the understanding. And I feel like, especially with junior developers, it's a coaching moment. It's a moment where you can really probe them and ask questions, and then the light bulb goes off and they really get it. Whereas back and forth text is never going to count. Senior folks, where it's just like, did you realize there was already a method that did this, and it's kind of more mundane, trivial. You guys have a framework, you know what you're doing. It's finding the 2% thing. I think could be offline, but I think especially when you're working with somebody new or more junior, having that human voice is a way better option. Mm-hmm. And the tone is obvious. You can't tell the tone. So, even with your smiley emojis. It could be smiley, I'm pissed off, smiley, or smiley, I'm happy. Smiley,
All right.
Wink, wink.
All right. So moving on, I think we are maybe running short of time. So yeah, we had a discussion about the pros and cons of having online reviews versus offline. I mean, as Louis mentioned, even with our project, we have tickets that are small enough, so it's not feasible to do online reviews or calls for every little change. But what we do try is have like a dev meeting every few weeks where we have a code walkthrough where we'll go through a big feature where everybody kind of looks at how something is implemented. Anyway, so that's about feedback. So the next part is just a few slides about how as software consultants, what's the most things to keep in mind when we are talking to somebody who's not a software engineer, who's not technical, right? So this could be like talking to a client, justifying your estimates, to a manager, working with business analysts or requirements or users, for example, right? These are just things to keep in mind for that. So the first thing was just a question, like if you had to explain refactoring, like how would you explain refactoring to your client? Like you want money to do refactoring, how would you ask?
Organizing your desk.
What?
Organizing your desk.
Organizing your desk. Yeah.
He does organize all the time.
Sometimes things get messy in a hurry.
Why did it get messy?
Right. Yeah. So that's great, right? So that's exactly what we would do, right? So one of the things when I was reading up, I like refactoring is like spring cleaning, where you do it once every few months, where you basically just dust everything off, you throw away stuff that you don't need. You don't really change anything, but it's just kind of everything looks nicer at the end, right? So that's the point.
You can't argue with that.
Yeah.
Right.
So one of the things that we have to keep in mind is when we are we basically as software engineers, as consultants, usually kind of heads down all the time in code. You just don't really think about when you're talking to somebody who may not be a software engineer. So just make sure that you avoid jargon, avoid acronyms as much as possible. Talk to them, talk to whoever in a way that is more accessible, right? So that's something that they can understand. Always make sure that you don't talk down to somebody like that. Just because somebody is not a software engineer, that doesn't mean that they're not an expert in what they're doing, right? So everybody's on the team for a reason. You bring the technical knowledge, but they bring the business knowledge, and you have to have a way to work in a way that is complementary and in a way that's going to basically make sure that the project is successful. And this is something that I think about a lot in terms of whenever we're talking to clients, or this is something that the more you talk to clients in terms of their business, that will give them the benefit, the confidence that you are basically there to help them solve your problem. They can talk to you in those terms, and this is something that they're able to then grasp what you're suggesting in a way that is probably better. And this also, I think it goes the other way around, right? So this is something that we can probably throw up to a discussion, but something that happens where we'll get a solution, we'll get requirements, or the problem will be presented to us in terms of a solution that the client has thought of, right? So they're not describing the business problem they have; they're describing the solution that they think they need. Even though that's your job, right? Your job is to bring the expertise to suggest the best solution. For example, if they're doing something in Excel, they're like, I just need something, that's going to throw up a grid on a web page, and I'm going to just track my orders on that. But that's probably not the best way to do this. There's probably a better way where you can structure stuff that is, individually searchable and so on. So I think that's finding that balance about the way you talk to them, and then the way you can have them talk to you in a way that that gives you empowers you to kind of solve their problems. So that's all about that. Any feedback on this particular part about talking to clients, talking to people who are not technical?
I have a funny story.
Sure.
I worked at a big company, and we were doing a major project that had executive oversight, and we had a whole set of servers, and they kept crashing and they kept falling down. And we were explaining this, at all these meetings, and the executive, he wanted to go to the data center immediately. And the guy's like, why? He's like, I want to go look at your servers. And so he's like, well, I don't even know where they are. So he finally took the guy over there, and he's like, they look fine to me. He thought they were literally
falling.
So we were using jargon to an executive that he didn't understand.
Oh, the servers are crashing.
Falling down and crashing. And so you have to be careful what you say.
Yeah.
He thought he was going to apply a mechanical fix to the problem.
That's the great story.
It was holding up a multi-million-dollar project. So,
yeah. All right. All right. So the last, just a couple more slides, and this is about written communication. Again, we're not talking about documents. We're just talking about interpersonal communication. So it used to happen in email. Basically, email used to be the only mode of communication where you're basically writing to each other. Now it's all. Can we still use Kona? I'm supposed to use Deltek collaboration. Yeah, you don't use Kona anymore?
Deltek collaboration.
It's too long. I'm going to use Kona. Collab. Anyway, so now there's Slack and there's instant messengers. So with emails, obviously, make sure that whenever you're writing something, keep the readers in mind. You check the to field, make sure that you're not the audience of the email is who's supposed to be. It's very tempting, obviously, to kind of always just put the whole team whenever you're writing to somebody, but it may not be the best idea. But then on the flip side, sometimes you don't really have a choice, right? So we've had situations I was going to pull up where you're working with a third-party contractor and they never respond unless the client is also CC'd on every email, right? So sometimes you just have to kind of pull that card out, right? And again, as if you're not comfortable to write emails, especially if you're a developer and you're not experienced in communicating to clients, it's fine. You always have help. It's okay. I used to do this all the time. Somebody would be like, hey, just write to the client, ask them what they mean. I'm like, wait, I don't really know how to write an email to a client, right? You just sort of start panicking and then you start, composing a bunch of stuff and put out. But it's okay then you just ask for somebody to review it for you, or, you send it to them, and then as you gain experience, you get better at kind of, writing emails to clients. At this point, I don't really think about it. We talk to clients all the time. I write emails. It's fine. It's not as much because of, again, as we said, because of Slack and IAMS. These Kona, Slack, Instant Messenger, these are now the water cooler, right? Because as more and more teams are remote, you don't talk to your co-workers as often. You don't talk to the team. So the idea is to kind of make sure that you keep that unstructured communication going. So one of the most important things is to participate, right? Not you see a lot of messages and you just want to say right now there are reaction GIFs and just emojis make it easy to participate. So you can do that. Sending compliments is a way to kind of nobody's going to mind if you send a compliment, right? Nobody's going to say anything about that. Celebrating team wins is important. This is actually from our team Slack from just 2 days ago. We had a production deployment and somebody put this up. It was pretty funny. Yeah. Oh, there you go. Yeah. So this is like a screenshot from the Slack that that we have for our team. So that's basically it for me. Thanks a lot for listening. And Thanks everybody on the phone. That's Amy Poehler.
It's recording.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.